going to talk about Beloved chapters 11 through 14. This is a shorter reading assignment. And one of the themes that runs through these 4 chapters is the theme of obsession. Remember, we talked about how Beloved comes back and she's like 20 years old, but she's really kind of got the mentality of a 3-year-old, a 2 or 3-year-old. So even though her body looks like a 20-year-old, a lot of the way she thinks about love is more obsessive, like a toddler. It's filled with jealousy and the desire for attention. And so that theme kind of runs through this theme of love, and sometimes at moments obsessive love kind of runs through these 4 chapters. And we've talked about how love is risky, but here we see these characters really kind of reaching to love as that default emotion, an emotion that we can't really compartmentalize, and we'll talk about that a little more in just a minute. So in this chapter, starting with chapter 11, we have it starts. She moved him, and this is Paul D is being moved out of the house by Beloved. Beloved is trying to put a rift between Paul D and Setha. Remember in the clearing when Setha was choked, and I said we weren't sure why Setha was choked? One of the things that we know is that at the moment that Beloved started to choke her, she was thinking about Paul D and how she wanted Paul D in her life. And Beloved is very jealous of Paul D because he is taking Setha's attention away from her. And she's already told us that she came for Setha. That's the only reason. That's all she wants is Setha. So she begins to move him out of the house. She moves him out of Setha's bed, into the keeping room, then into a rocking chair, or maybe vice versa, and then finally out into the cold house. And she comes to him and she says, I want you to touch me on the inside part and call me my name. And the implication there is that she wants him to sleep with her. And he does. He calls her name. She said, if you call my name, I'll go. And he does, and she doesn't. But let's think about touch me on the inside part. Let's look at that sort of figuratively rather than literally. Remember, in one of the early chapters, Paul D asks Setha what it feels like when she goes inside, meaning when she goes into all of those memories. And she says, I don't go inside. He said, but with me here, you can, because I'll always be there to catch you, to pull you back out. Okay, well, what follows that is he mentions the flakes of rust falling off of his tobacco tin and his red heart. So really, when she says, touch me on the inside part, she's really talking about, figuratively, we know what she's talking about literally, but figuratively, she's talking about going inside to where he's got all of those painful memories locked into this tobacco tin that we're told has taken the place of his heart. And when Beloved comes to him, she causes that tobacco tin, the lid, to kind of blow off, and he has a red heart again. He hasn't been able to ostracize, compartmentalize those emotions anymore. And we see that when he decides he's going to confess to Setha, because he loves her. He wants to be with her. He realizes he loves her and he wants to be with her. And he's so ashamed of himself for not being able to resist Beloved that he's going to confess to her, and he can't bring himself to. So he decides he'll tell her that he wants them to have a baby together. Okay. But I was going to say something. It's just like in class. I forgot. Maybe it'll come back to me. So he goes to, okay, hang on. Let me see if I can remember and then pick back up. Okay, I could never remember, but much like in class, it will probably come to me. um, so let's go into chapter 12. This is this moment with Seth trying to figure out where Beloved came from, but Beloved doesn't have any memory of where she came from because, of course, she's been absent. I remember. I remember. I was going to say, she's moving Paul out. We have to remember that Beloved is a ghost, and so there is something supernatural about her. So the fact that Paul D feels completely incapable of resisting her isn't necessarily a weakness in Paul D. It may be that he is incapable of resisting her. Perhaps she is using her sort of ghostly supernatural powers to control him and to move him out. Okay, so in chapter 12, Setha is trying to figure out where Beloved came from, and Beloved doesn't have any memories. Well, of course, we know that she was in that dark place, and so really, she's just been kind of, if we look at death in the way that Morrison is presenting it, in sort of that African way of moving just behind the veil, then obviously she's just been kind of in a void. So she doesn't really have memories of where she was in that intervening part. And so Setha thinks, well, maybe she's just locked those memories out because they've been too painful. She says maybe she remembers Ella talking about Ella had been held as a sex slave by a father and son. And she called the father and son the lowest yet. So again, just like we saw Paul D in Alfred, Georgia, in a different version of slavery that we don't typically see, Ella represents another version of slavery that we don't typically see, which is the version of her being held by a sex slave. So Setha thinks maybe that's what happened. But also in this chapter, we see Denver's sort of obsession with Beloved. She wants to make sure that Beloved never leaves her. They go out into the cold house, and Beloved disappears. And Denver is so afraid of Beloved's disappearance. Interesting connections here. They're in the dark in the cold house, and Denver can't find Beloved. And earlier in that chapter, Beloved has asked Denver, do the flowers disappear in the dark? Okay, why would she ask that? I mean, that's a weird question. Maybe a 2-year-old would have asked that question, but perhaps because she disappears in the dark, or she's afraid she will. And she's wondering if that's normal or natural. Another thing is Denver says that something about at night when Beloved comes undone in her sleep. So there's another like ghostly apparition kind of quality to that. And when she can't find Beloved in the cold house, she panics because she's afraid that Beloved will leave her. So while Beloved has come for Setha, Denver is the one who understands who Beloved is and wants her back. And then in the next chapter, that kind of carries this idea of the ghostliness of Beloved a little further, where she loses a tooth. And Denver says, didn't that hurt? And she said, yeah. But it talks about how she's afraid she'll come apart, suggesting that there's something very unnatural about a ghost coming back to life, and that her body, this body that she is in, will not endure indefinitely. She recognizes that she is beginning to deteriorate. And that whatever she has to do quickly. because she worries that her arms will fly off or she's just going to completely come undone. So also in this chapter, it starts with the last of the sweet home men. Paul D is the last of the sweet home men. And we see how this idea of man, Paul D, the sweet home men, the word men, has been something given to him. Well, he wonders, was it something given to him by Garner, or was it who he really was? If we remember the rooster, he says, even if you cooked rooster, you would still be eating a rooster. Even if you cooked Mister, you would still be eating a rooster named Mister. But Paul D was not allowed to be and stay what he was. And so Beloved is coming in and making him question who he is. Is he a man? If he can't resist this woman, this girl who comes in and moves him, then is he really a man? What does it mean to be a man? Was he only a man because Mr. Garner gave him that title? And once Mr. Garner was gone and school teacher stripped him of the identity of man, who was right? Was Mr. Garner right? Or was school teacher right? So he asked Setha to have a baby with him. It'd be a way of reconnecting with her and affirming his manhood all at the same time. Okay. Last chapter is chapter 14. Hang on just a second. Okay, we actually did already talk about chapter 14, which is the chapter where she loses her tooth and worries about falling apart. I just didn't have that denoted as a part of chapter 14 or as the content of chapter 14 in my notes. So we've got this covered. Next week, we're going to do chapters 15 through 18, really the best chapters. And it's the place where we will start to see many of the pieces come together and understand more about what happened.